I'm 33 years old, and I live alone in a small house out in the country. That night started off completely normal, right up until I was getting ready for bed. I had the day off, so I'd been home the entire day. Nothing stood out or seemed unusual. Around 10 o'clock that night, I went upstairs, got ready for bed, and lay there scrolling through TikTok while I tried to fall asleep. That's when I started hearing something. I paused the video. Very faintly, I could make out voices coming from outside. It sounded like at least two people, maybe even more. They were speaking quietly, almost like they didn't want anyone to hear them, which immediately made me uneasy. I'd never had anyone trespass on my property before, at least not that I was aware of. My house sits well away from the nearest neighbors, and there aren't any sidewalks or paths nearby. So anyone that close had to be there on purpose. I sat up in bed and strained to hear what they were saying, but the voices were still too far away to understand. So I got up and walked over to the window. The second I stepped in front of it, every voice went silent. A cold chill ran through me because it made me realize whoever was outside had probably seen me. All I could see, though, was darkness stretching across my entire yard. The thought that several people might be standing out there, staring up at my bedroom window, was incredibly unsettling. I stepped away from the window almost immediately. I kept hoping it was all some misunderstanding. Maybe they had wandered onto my property without realizing it. But if that was true, why hadn't they left after seeing the house? And why had it sounded like they were getting closer instead of farther away? I waited a few minutes before checking the window again, but I still couldn't see anything. After that, I went downstairs and looked out just about every window in the house, hoping I'd spot something. The worst part was not knowing what was happening or where they were. I think about 40 minutes had passed since I first heard the voices before I finally decided to risk opening the front door so I could get a better look and listen. I switched on the porch light, unlocked the door, and stepped outside. After standing there for a few seconds, I moved a little farther away from the doorway. The only sounds I could hear were the wind and crickets chirping somewhere in the distance. Beyond the reach of the porch light, it was so dark I couldn't make out the outlines of the trees or anything else. But while I stood there, this overwhelming feeling washed over me. My eyes kept darting around in every direction, and I suddenly felt incredibly on edge. It was almost like I could feel multiple people watching me from somewhere in the darkness.
I hurried back inside and locked the door behind me. Maybe it was nothing more than instinct, but I had this strong feeling that something bad was about to happen. I had no idea what, and I didn't want to stick around to find out. Once I was back inside, with every door locked, that feeling gradually faded, which made me think maybe it really had just been my imagination. I got myself a glass of water, went back upstairs, and spent a little while calming myself down before climbing back into bed and trying to sleep. It took some time, but eventually I drifted off. I'd been asleep for a few hours when a loud crashing noise from the hallway outside my bedroom jolted me awake.
I shot out of bed, adrenaline hitting instantly, ran to the door and threw it open. The second I looked into the hallway, I saw shattered glass scattered all over the floor. Someone had hurled a rock straight through the window at the end of the back hallway. I was completely stunned and just stood there for several seconds, trying to process what had just happened.
Then I heard the voices again. There were several of them now, shouting instructions to each other, and between the yelling came powerful blows against the front door. Every hit made the entire house shake. As more windows were smashed, I backed into my bedroom and locked the door. I grabbed my phone and called the police. I was still on the line when I heard the horrifying sound of the front door finally giving way, followed by multiple people rushing into the house. I could hear their footsteps moving all over the first floor. I even heard a few of them laughing. The dispatcher told me officers were about 6 minutes away,
but knowing those people were already inside and could probably break through my bedroom door without much trouble, I didn't feel safe staying there. I went to my bedroom window and pushed it open. My house had a low roof that sloped down just beneath the window, making it possible to climb out onto it.
It definitely wasn't designed for that, and I knew how dangerous it was. But I honestly didn't think I had any other choice. I carefully climbed through the window onto the roof, pulled the window shut behind me, and crawled higher toward the peak. About 2 minutes later, the men reached my bedroom door and started pounding on it. A couple of them yelled for me to open up, and some even used fake friendly voices like they were joking around. I felt sick to my stomach. It only took them a few more hits before they smashed the bedroom door open. I could hear their footsteps spreading out through the room below me. For the next 40 seconds or so, I listened as they searched around, and I could tell they were getting frustrated. They went through the entire upstairs, probably checking every room one more time. After that, I had no idea what they were doing. They stayed inside the house until I heard police sirens getting closer in the distance. Then they all rushed back outside and disappeared into the darkness. I stayed on the roof until the officers got inside and helped me climb down safely. I still can't believe I made it out of that alive. A whole group of people violently breaking into my house out in the country in the middle of the night while I was there alone. I can only imagine what they planned to do. The house was completely trashed, but nothing had actually been stolen, which unfortunately made it seem obvious their real target was whoever lived there, not my belongings. Whether they had specifically chosen my house or had simply picked it at random, I honestly don't think I'll ever know. Last Halloween, I had plans to go to a party with a bunch of friends. It was supposed to be a house party at a mutual friend's place, but on Halloween morning, the whole thing got canceled. I'd slept in that day because I'd planned on staying out all night at the party. Once the plans fell apart, I ended up spending the day by myself at home. I went about my day like I normally would, and by that evening, I was stretched out on the couch. Trick-or-treating had been over for quite a while, and even though I wasn't really sleepy, I was definitely tired from doing absolutely nothing all day. I grabbed a blanket, some snacks, and turned on an old horror movie just to pass the time. The TV was mounted across from the couch, and the front windows were directly in front of where I was sitting. The kitchen opened up off to one side of the living room. I almost always kept the curtains closed at night for privacy, but while I was watching the movie, I kept catching what looked like movement through the narrow gap between them. Each time I'd turn and look, there was nothing there, so I'd go back to watching until it happened again. After the 5th time, I finally got up to check. I honestly expected not to find anything. I pulled the curtains apart and looked outside. Right away, I spotted someone in front of my house. He wasn't standing close to the window like I'd expected. The guy was out in the street in front of my house. He looked like he was around 35 and was wearing a dark Halloween costume. He kept wandering around without any clear direction, walking toward the sidewalk, then turning around and crossing the street again. The way he was moving made him seem drunk. I would have bet good money he'd just left a Halloween party and was completely wasted. I glanced at my watch and saw it was around 2 a.m. He didn't really seem dangerous, though, and I didn't think he was what I'd been seeing near my window because he was standing too far away. I closed the curtains again and went back to the couch to finish the movie. Even with the curtains fully shut, there was still a small gap between them, but after that, I didn't notice any more movement. If anything, it just made me more curious, because whatever I'd been seeing seemed to stop as soon as I looked outside. Then, about 15 minutes later, someone knocked on my front door. My eyes immediately darted across the room, and I stared at the door for a few seconds. I was almost positive it had to be that drunk guy. What the hell was he doing at my front door? I stayed where I was,
hoping he'd give up and leave, but then he knocked again. I finally walked over just to make sure it was him. I looked through the peephole and saw the same man in the dark costume, but something about him had changed. He wasn't stumbling anymore or swaying back and forth. He was standing perfectly still, barely moving, just staring at the door. Even through the peephole, I could see his eyes were wide open and locked on the doorknob, like he was waiting for me to answer. That immediately started creeping me out. If he was really drunk, how was he standing completely still without losing his balance, especially when he'd looked so wasted just 20 minutes earlier? That's when I started wondering if he hadn't been drunk at all. Maybe he was just some lunatic, which honestly felt even worse.
I seriously thought about calling the police, but right as I was considering it, the man stepped away from my porch and started walking off. He continued down the sidewalk for as far as I could see, and it looked like he was finally done with whatever he had been doing. I left the door and went back to the couch. Nothing else really happened over the next few hours. I ended up pouring myself some wine, hoping it would make me tired enough to go to bed. I knew that if I tried to sleep without it, I'd probably just lie there awake, staring at the ceiling, so it didn't seem worth trying. While I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, I suddenly heard a tapping sound. It was coming from the opposite side of the house. I got up and walked a little closer, trying to figure out what it was and exactly where it was coming from. It sounded like a slow, dull tapping against the outside of the house. I walked into the hallway and then into the family room. My eyes followed the sound until they settled on the far window. Then I saw it. The silhouette of a man was standing just outside the glass, tapping something against the window. It was too dark to make out his face or see what he was holding. I immediately ran back into the living room and called the police. The really unsettling part was that he never stopped. Even while I was talking to the dispatcher, I could still hear that slow tapping against the window. Once they told me officers were on the way, I walked back into the hallway and looked toward the window again, hoping I'd be able to tell if it was the same creepy guy from earlier. He must have noticed me because he stopped tapping, stood there without moving for a moment, and then turned and walked away. It was far too dark for me to make out any details, but I couldn't imagine it being anyone other than the same man I'd seen before. The officers searched all around the neighborhood and wrote down everything I told them.
I gave them as detailed a description as I could of the man who had come to my door earlier that night. Unfortunately, they never found him. The only other lead came about 3 weeks later, when someone a couple of streets away called the police after experiencing something very similar. They had seen a strange man lurking around their house and behaving in a really unsettling way. It was probably the same person, but nobody ever figured out what he was trying to do, or if he's still out there doing it. I still catch myself wondering what would have happened if I'd actually opened the door for him. One night I got home from work at around 10:30 p.m. I made myself a quick bowl of cereal for dinner, then headed straight to my room where I had my gaming set up. The plan was to stay up late playing games with my friends. They all worked late shifts too, so they were running behind that night. I finished eating while I waited, then started playing on my own until they got online. Right in the middle of a match, my phone started ringing. I glanced over, expecting it to be one of my friends, but it was just a number I didn't recognize. I ignored the call, but only a few minutes later, the exact same number called again. That immediately seemed strange to me because scam callers usually don't call back twice in a row from the same number. I declined the second call, but just like you'd expect, the phone rang again almost immediately. This was the third time. At that point, I figured there was no way it was just a scam. I thought maybe one of my friends was using someone else's phone.
I answered, but stayed quiet at first, waiting for whoever it was to speak. After a few seconds of silence, I finally said, "Hello?" There was still no answer. I knew the line hadn't disconnected, though, because I could hear wind in the background. Someone was definitely still there, listening. After about 20 seconds, I hung up because it was starting to creep me out. A few minutes later, my friends finally got online, and the first thing I asked was which one of them was messing with me. At first, they acted like it was them, but it was obvious they were kidding because they had no idea what I was talking about. They agreed it sounded like some kind of prank call, but at the same time, what kind of prank is calling someone over and over without saying a single word? None of us had an explanation, so we dropped it and started gaming. Strangely enough, once I was in a voice call with my friends, the mystery calls stopped completely. About 2 or 3 hours passed, and I pretty much forgot the whole thing had even happened. Around 3 a.m., we finally called it a night. After we ended the voice chat, I stayed sitting at my desk for another 2 minutes when I suddenly felt my phone vibrate. I looked over and saw I'd gotten a text message. Before I even unlocked my phone, I noticed it came from the same number that had been calling me, and I could tell it included a picture. I unlocked the screen and opened the image. My stomach instantly dropped, and all the color drained from my face. It was a photo of me, sitting at my desk, playing my game, taken from directly behind me only moments earlier. I spun around as fast as I could and looked behind me. No one was there. The only thing that gave me even a little relief was seeing the window behind my desk. I convinced myself that whatever this picture was, it had probably been taken from outside instead of from someone actually standing inside my house.
I rushed over to the window and looked outside, but there wasn't anyone there. I checked that the window was locked, then immediately shut the blinds. After that, I went back to my desk, still staring at the photo on my phone, completely shaken. I knew this wasn't some harmless joke. It was seriously disturbing. I saved the picture and immediately sent it to the group chat with my friends, hoping against all odds that one of them would admit it was some elaborate prank. This time, though, nobody even tried to joke around. Every single one of them told me I needed to either get out of the house or call the police. I could feel my heart beating harder as I slowly cracked open my bedroom door and looked out into the rest of the house. Everything was completely quiet. For some reason, I wanted to make sure the house was secure before calling the police, just in case someone was still inside and I was in immediate danger. I barely made it into the hallway before I looked around the corner and saw the front door standing wide open. I still don't know how to explain it, but I instantly had this overwhelming feeling that someone was just out of sight nearby. Without thinking, I turned around, ran back into my room, and locked the door. Almost immediately, I heard footsteps coming down the hallway. Whoever it was walked slowly until they stopped right outside my bedroom door, then knocked. I watched the doorknob move, and after that came a few more knocks. He never said a single word. I called the police right away, but the whole thing was over in less than 40 seconds. The man outside my door suddenly walked away, and I can only assume he left the house. A few officers arrived soon after and investigated everything, but I never got the answers I was hoping for.
The phone number that had called and texted me came from a burner phone, so it couldn't be traced back to anyone. I never actually saw the man, never learned who he was, and never found out why any of it happened. Even now, I still get paranoid sometimes because there's nothing stopping him from coming back one day and doing it all over again. Or something even worse.